My name is Elena Rodriguez, and I'm 28 years old. 3 weeks before my wedding, I walked into my apartment to find my younger sister Victoria wrapped in my fiancé Marcus's arms, wearing my grandmother's engagement ring on her finger. When I confronted them, Victoria looked me dead in the eye and said, "He never loved you, Elena. He was just settling until someone better came along." What happened at their hastily planned wedding 6 months later would expose a web of lies so twisted that it would destroy not just their marriage but reveal the truth about who my family really was. If you think you know where this story is going, trust me, you don't. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday in Portland, Oregon. I'd been working late at the architectural firm, where I'd finally landed my dream job after years of unpaid internships and night school. The project was a community center in East Portland, something I'd poured my heart into because it represented everything I believed in, creating beautiful spaces for people who deserved them but couldn't always afford them. Marcus had texted earlier that he was feeling sick and would spend the day at his apartment instead of coming over as planned. We'd been living together for 2 years, but he kept his place as a studio for his photography work. I thought nothing of it. After 3 years together, I trusted him completely. That trust was about to cost me everything. I'd stopped by our shared apartment to grab the wedding planning binder. Our ceremony was scheduled for October 15th, just 3 weeks away, and there were still a million details to finalize. The venue, a restored Victorian mansion in the Pearl District, was booked. The dress, a vintage lace creation that had taken me months to save for, hung in our closet. The flowers, the music, the photographer, everything was falling into place for what I'd dreamed would be the perfect day. Our apartment was a converted loft in the Alberta Arts District, the kind of space Marcus and I had fallen in love with, because it felt authentic, creative, alive. Exposed brick walls displayed his photographs and my architectural sketches. Plants cascaded from every available surface because I couldn't resist rescuing them from the clearance section at the nursery. It was small, cozy, and entirely ours. Or so I thought. The key stuck in the lock, as it always did, requiring that specific jiggle Marcus and I had perfected over months of practice. I pushed the door open, calling out automatically even though I knew no one should be home. That's when I heard it. Soft laughter, unmistakably feminine, drifting from our bedroom. My first thought was confusion, rather than suspicion. Marcus wasn't supposed to be here, and we weren't expecting anyone. Maybe our landlord had let someone in for repairs, though that seemed unlikely without notice. I set my bag down quietly, something instinctive making me move carefully through our living space. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and through the gap I could see movement. 2 figures on our bed. The bed where Marcus and I had planned our future, where we'd talked about children and growing old together. The world seemed to tilt sideways as my brain struggled to process what my eyes were seeing. Marcus, very much not sick, was kissing someone with the kind of passion I hadn't seen from him in months. But it wasn't just anyone. The long dark hair spread across our pillows belonged to Victoria, my 24-year-old sister. The sister I'd helped through college, who'd called me crying last month about her latest heartbreak, who was supposed to be my maid of honor in 3 weeks. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't notice me standing there, my entire world crumbling in slow motion. Victoria's left hand was visible above Marcus's shoulder, and on her ring finger, catching the afternoon light streaming through our bedroom window, was my grandmother's engagement ring. The what ring Marcus had proposed with, the ring that had been in my family for 3 generations, the ring I'd been so proud to wear. I must have made a sound, a gasp, or a whimper, because they suddenly broke apart. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: shock, guilt, something that might have been relief. But Victoria's reaction was different. She smiled. Actually smiled, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. "Elena?" Marcus said, scrambling to sit up, his voice carrying none of the warmth it usually held when he said my name. "I can explain." "Can you?" My voice sounded strange, disconnected, like it was coming from someone else entirely. Can you explain why my sister is wearing my ring in my bed? Victoria stretched languidly, making no effort to cover herself or show any shame. If anything, she seemed to be enjoying the drama. It's not your ring anymore, Elena. It's mine. Marcus gave it to me because he finally realized what he wanted. The casualness of her tone, the complete lack of remorse, hit me harder than the betrayal itself. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake they were horrified to have made. This was planned, deliberate, calculated. How long? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Marcus couldn't meet my eyes. Elena, please, let's talk about this rationally. How long? I repeated, my voice getting stronger even as my legs felt weaker. 6 months, Victoria answered when Marcus remained silent. Since New Year's Eve, actually. Remember that party at the Andersons? You left early because you had that presentation the next day, and Marcus stayed to keep me company. One thing led to another, and we realized we had a real connection. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of planning our wedding while they carried on behind my back. Every family dinner where Victoria had asked sweetly about wedding plans, every time she'd offered to help with preparations, every moment she'd played the supportive sister while stealing my life. I thought we were happy, I said to Marcus, hating how small my voice sounded. We were comfortable, he replied, finally looking at me with something resembling his old kindness. But Elena, we weren't passionate. We were like roommates who occasionally slept together. Victoria and I, we have this fire, this intensity you and I never had. The words stung, because there was truth in them. Our relationship had settled into routine over the past year. We'd stopped surprising each other, stopped trying to impress each other. I'd assumed that was normal, the natural progression from the honeymoon phase to something deeper and more stable. Apparently Marcus had seen it as evidence that we were wrong for each other. So you decided to cheat instead of talking to me about it? We tried to fight it, Victoria said, still lounging in my bed like she belonged there. But some things are just meant to be. Marcus was never really yours, Elena. He was just waiting for the right person to come along. The right person being my sister? She shrugged, and that gesture, so dismissive of 3 years of my life, of plans and dreams and promises, made something snap inside me. Get out, I said quietly. Elena, we should discuss this like adults, Marcus began. Get out, I screamed, louder than I'd ever screamed at anyone. Both of you, get out of my apartment. Actually, Victoria said, sliding off the bed and beginning to dress with infuriating calm. It's Marcus's apartment too. His name is on the lease. She was right, and we all knew it. We'd signed the lease together when we moved in, equal partners in what I'd thought was our shared life. Now that partnership felt like another trap, another way I'd made myself vulnerable to people who didn't deserve my trust. Fine, I said, grabbing clothes from the dresser, stuffing them into the gym bag I kept in our closet. Then I'll leave. Elena, wait, Marcus said, and for a moment he sounded like the man I'd fallen in love with. We don't have to be enemies. We can work this out civilly. I stopped packing and looked at him, really looked at him. The sandy brown hair I'd run my fingers through countless times. The green.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Eyes that had looked at me with such love when he proposed. The hands that had held mine while we planned our future. When had he stopped being mine? When had I stopped being enough? Civilly? I repeated. You want to work out your betrayal, civilly? I know you're hurt, he said, but in time you'll see this is better for everyone. We weren't right for each other, Elena. Deep down, you know that. What I know is that you're a coward, I said, my voice steady now, fueled by anger that was cleaner and more useful than heartbreak. If you weren't happy, you should have ended it before starting something with my sister. Instead, you let me plan a wedding, buy a dress, send invitations, while you were sleeping with Victoria behind my back. The wedding, Victoria said suddenly, as if just remembering. What about all the deposits? The question was so practical, so cold, that it took my breath away. Here I was, devastated and displaced, and she was worried about money. What about them? I asked. Well, someone should use them. It seems wasteful to just cancel everything when Marcus and I are planning to get married anyway. I stared at her, this person who shared my DNA, who I'd grown up with, protected, loved unconditionally. You want to use my wedding for your wedding? Why not? The venue is beautiful, the date works for us, and all the planning is done. It makes perfect sense. The audacity was breathtaking. Not only had they destroyed my relationship, they wanted to steal my wedding too. Everything I'd worked for, saved for, dreamed about, they wanted to claim as their own. You're unbelievable, I whispered. I'm practical, Victoria corrected. Someone might as well benefit from all your hard work. I finished packing my bag and walked toward the door, then turned back one final time. They were standing together now, Marcus's arm around Victoria's waist, already looking like a couple, like they belonged together in a way he and I apparently never had. When you get married in my venue, wearing my ring, using my plans, I said, my voice deadly calm, I hope you remember this moment. I hope you remember how it felt to destroy someone who loved you both unconditionally. Victoria's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. You'll thank us eventually, Elena. We're setting you free to find someone who actually deserves you. No, I said. You're revealing who you really are, both of you. I left then, walking out of the apartment and the life I'd built, carrying nothing but a bag of clothes and the knowledge that everything I'd believed about the people closest to me was a lie. The next few hours passed in a blur of practical necessities that felt surreal given the circumstances. I called my best friend Chloe, who worked as a nurse at OHSU and was between shifts. She picked me up from a coffee shop where I'd been sitting in a daze, took one look at my face and drove me straight to her apartment in Southeast Portland without asking questions. Chloe's place was the opposite of the loft I'd just left, small and cluttered but warm, filled with medical textbooks, houseplants that actually survived under her care, and photos of our adventures over the years. She'd been my roommate in college, my maid of honor elect, and the one person who'd always told me the truth, even when I didn't want to hear it. What happened? She asked once. She'd settled me on her couch with a mug of tea I wasn't drinking. I told her everything, watching her expression shift from confusion to outrage to something that looked like murder. Chloe had never particularly liked Victoria, though she'd kept her opinions to herself out of respect for me. She'd been politely neutral about Marcus, saying he seemed nice but lacked passion. Apparently, she'd been saving his passion for my sister. I'm going to kill them, she said when I finished, slowly and creatively. Don't, I said, surprised by how drained I felt now that I'd said it all out loud. They're not worth it. Elena, they've been lying to you for 6 months. 6 months. Every family dinner, every wedding planning session, every time you asked Victoria for advice about marriage, she was sleeping with your fiancé. When she put it like that, the scope of the betrayal became even clearer. It wasn't just about Marcus choosing Victoria. It was about both of them choosing to deceive me, day after day, while I trusted them completely. What are you going to do about the wedding? Chloe asked gently. The wedding. In 3 weeks, 150 people were expecting to celebrate my marriage to Marcus. The deposits were paid, the dress was altered, the flowers were ordered. My parents had flown in from Phoenix last weekend to help with final preparations. My aunts, uncles, and cousins had made travel arrangements. Marcus's family had been planning for months. I have to cancel everything, I said, the enormity of the task hitting me. The venue, the caterer, the photographer, the band. Oh God, the invitations went out 2 months ago. Or, Chloe said carefully, you could do what Victoria suggested and let them use it. I stared at her. You can't be serious. Think about it practically. You'll lose all the deposits anyway if you cancel. At least this way, someone gets use out of all your planning, and you don't have to deal with the logistics of canceling everything while you're falling apart. I can't let them have my wedding. It wouldn't be your wedding anymore. It would be theirs. Your wedding died the moment you walked into that bedroom. She was right. But the thought of Victoria walking down the aisle I'd chosen in a dress similar to mine to marry the man who'd promised to love me forever made me physically ill. I need to call my parents, I said instead. The conversation with my mother was one of the most difficult of my life. Carmen Rodriguez had been so excited about the wedding, had taken time off work to help with preparations, had even bought a new dress for the occasion. Hearing her joy turn to shock, then fury, then protective love was almost worse than the original betrayal. "Mija, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice thick with tears. "What can your father and I do?" "I don't know yet. I'm still processing." "Do you want us to come get you?" "You could stay with us for a while." The offer was tempting. Going home to Phoenix, letting my parents take care of me while I figured out what came next. But running away felt like letting Victoria and Marcus win, like admitting they'd broken me completely. "Not yet," I said. "I need to handle some things here first." "What about Victoria? Have you talked to her since?" I almost laughed at the question. What would I say? Congratulations on stealing my life? "Elena, she's still your sister." "No," I said firmly. "A sister wouldn't do this. I don't know what Victoria is, but she's not my sister anymore." The next morning brought a text from Victoria that made my blood boil. "Elena, we need to discuss the wedding arrangements. Since Marcus and I are planning to marry on the same date, we should coordinate to avoid confusion." The casual tone, as if we were discussing dinner plans rather than the destruction of my life, was infuriating. But it also gave me an idea. If Victoria wanted my wedding so badly, if she was so confident that stealing Marcus was justified, then maybe it was time to let her have exactly what she wanted. I called the venue first. The Whitmore Mansion was a restored Victorian estate that specialized in elegant weddings, and I'd fallen in love with it the moment I'd seen the grand staircase and crystal chandeliers. The events coordinator, a woman named Patricia whom I'd worked with for months, was horrified when I explained the situation. "I'm so sorry, dear," she said. "What a terrible thing to go through. Of course we can cancel your event. You'll lose the deposit, but under the circumstances, that's the least of your concerns." "Actually," I said, "I want to transfer the booking to my sister and my ex-fiancé. They want to get married on the same date." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Are you certain? That seems like it might be painful for you." "I'm certain. In fact, I'd like to keep all the arrangements exactly as we planned them. The flowers, the menu, the music, everything. Consider it my wedding gift to them. If that's what you want, we can certainly arrange the transfer." I made similar calls to the caterer, the florist, the band, and the photographer. Each conversation was easier than the last, as if I was dismantling not just a wedding but my old life entirely. By the end of the day, Victoria and Marcus would have their perfect wedding, exactly as I'd planned it. The only thing I kept was my dress. The vintage lace gown with the cathedral train that I'd saved for months to afford. They could have my venue, my flowers, my menu, but they couldn't have the dress I'd dreamed of wearing. That evening, Marcus called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "Elena, Victoria told me what you did with the wedding arrangements. That was incredibly generous." "Was it? We both appreciate that you're being so mature about this." "Mature?" As if maturity was what motivated me to hand over my wedding plans to the people who'd betrayed me. "I'm glad you're happy," I said, my voice neutral. "We are. And Elena, I hope someday you'll understand that this is better for everyone. Victoria and I, we bring out the best in each other. We have this connection that's rare and special. The same connection that made you lie to me for 6 months?" He was quiet for a moment. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But I hope eventually we can be friends. You're a good person, Elena. You deserve someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved." "Yes," I agreed. "I do." After I hung up, I sat in Chloe's living room, staring at my phone and wondering if I'd just made a huge mistake. Giving them my wedding felt like the ultimate surrender, as if I was admitting that they were right to betray me, that they deserved my dreams more than I did. But something else was stirring in me, something that felt almost like anticipation. Victoria thought she'd won, thought she'd gotten away with the perfect crime. Marcus believed he'd traded up, that Victoria was some upgrade from ordinary, boring Elena. They had no idea what was coming. Because while they'd been planning their stolen romance, I'd been working on that community center project. The one that had kept me late at the office. The one that represented everything I believed in about creating something meaningful and lasting. The project that had just been approved for a feature in Architectural Digest. along with a profile of the young architect who'd designed it. Victoria had always been the pretty one, the charming one, the one who got what she wanted through manipulation and tears. But she'd never been the smart one, the one who planned ahead, the one who understood that some victories take time to unfold. As I finally drifted off to sleep on Chloe's couch, I found myself smiling for the first time since my world had collapsed. Victoria wanted my wedding, my life, my man. She could have them. But she had no idea what she'd actually stolen, or what she'd awakened in the process. The real story was just beginning. 2 weeks after I'd handed over my wedding to the people who'd betrayed me, I was sitting in the offices of Architectural Digest when my phone started buzzing with increasingly frantic messages. The irony wasn't lost on me that on the same day Victoria and Marcus were sending out new invitations with their names replacing mine, I was being photographed for a magazine feature that would change my career forever. The AD photographer, a woman named Saskia Chen who'd shot covers for Vogue and Vanity Fair, was capturing me in front of the scale model of the community center when my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. I'd silenced it for the interview, but the screen kept flashing with notifications. "We can take a break if you need to check that," Saskia said, lowering her camera. "No, it's fine," I said, though curiosity was eating at me. "Whatever it is can wait." The interview had gone better than I'd dared hope. Janet Morrison, the senior editor, had been genuinely impressed by the community center design, calling it architecturally innovative with profound social impact. She'd spent an hour asking about my philosophy, my inspiration, my plans for the future. It felt surreal to be discussing my career trajectory, when 2 weeks ago I'd been planning a wedding that was now happening without me. This community center represents something we don't see enough of in contemporary architecture, Janet had said, reviewing the photographs of the completed building. Young architects often chase prestige projects, the flashy commercial buildings that look good in portfolios. But you've created something that will genuinely improve lives for decades to come. The feature would run in the December issue, she'd explained, alongside a spotlight on emerging architects under 30. It was the kind of recognition that launched careers, the kind of opportunity I'd dreamed about since graduate school. When the photo shoot finally wrapped, I checked my phone to find 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and 12 voicemails. Most were from numbers I didn't recognize, but several were from Chloe, my parents, and surprisingly, my Aunt Rosa, my mother's sister who lived in Seattle and rarely called unless someone was dead or getting married. I started with Chloe's messages, figuring she'd give me the most coherent explanation. "Elena, call me immediately. Something's happening with Victoria and Marcus. Seriously, call me now. This is insane. Where are you? Check your social media. Victoria is having a complete meltdown." I opened Instagram first, where I had a modest following of architecture enthusiasts and friends. My notifications were flooded with tags, comments, and mentions. But it was Victoria's account that made my blood run cold. She'd posted a series of increasingly erratic stories over the past few hours. The first few were normal Victoria content. Selfies from the nail salon where she was getting a manicure for her upcoming wedding, photos of the dress she'd chosen, a screenshot of the weather forecast showing sunshine for the weekend. But then the tone shifted dramatically. "Some people are so jealous they can't stand to see others happy," read one story over a black background. "When family turns against you for finding true love," said another, this one with a crying emoji. The next story was a photo of her and Marcus, but her smile looked strained, and his arm around her seemed more possessive than loving. The caption read, "Real love conquers all obstacles, even family drama." But it was the final story that made my stomach drop. Victoria had posted a screenshot of what appeared to be a legal document, though the text was too blurry to read clearly. The caption said, "Some people will do anything to ruin your happiness. Thank God we have lawyers." I called Chloe immediately. "Finally," she answered on the first ring. "Where have you been?" "A photo shoot for Architectural Digest. What's going on?" "Victoria's losing her mind on social media, claiming you're trying to sabotage her wedding." But that's not the crazy part. Elena, Marcus's ex-girlfriend, showed up at their apartment this morning. My brain struggled to process this information. What ex-girlfriend? Apparently one Victoria didn't know about. Her name is Samantha something, and she had some very interesting things to share about your dear former fiancé. I sat down on a bench outside the AD offices, suddenly needing the support. What kind of things? The kind that suggest Marcus has a pattern of overlapping relationships. And Elena, there's more. Remember how you always thought it was weird that he kept his own apartment even after you moved in together? He said it was for his photography studio. Right. Well, Samantha has been living there for the past 4 months. The world tilted sideways again, just as it had 2 weeks ago when I'd walked into my bedroom. Living there? Full-time. She thought she was his girlfriend. Apparently, Marcus told her you were just a roommate he was helping out until you found your own place. I started laughing, a sound that was probably closer to hysteria than humor. So he was cheating on me with Victoria, and cheating on Victoria with this Samantha? It gets worse. Samantha found out about the wedding when she saw Victoria's Instagram posts. She went to confront him this morning and found Victoria there instead. That's when the real fireworks started. I tried to imagine the scene. Victoria, probably wearing one of her carefully curated casual but expensive outfits, coming face to face with another woman who thought she was Marcus's girlfriend. Victoria, who prided herself on always being the smartest person in the room, discovering she'd been played just as thoroughly as I had. What happened when they met? From what I can piece together from the various social media meltdowns happening right now, Samantha had keys to the apartment. She walked in on Victoria and Marcus having breakfast, introduced herself as his girlfriend, and asked who Victoria was. Oh my God. Victoria apparently started screaming that Samantha was lying, that Marcus would never cheat on her. And Samantha, bless her heart, pulled out her phone and showed Victoria all the photos of her and Marcus together over the past 4 months, including some very intimate ones. The satisfaction I felt was immediate and shameful. Victoria had been so smug about stealing Marcus from me, so confident that she'd won some kind of prize. Finding out she'd just been another victim in his pattern of deception must have been devastating. Where is Marcus in all this? That's the best part. He tried to play it off like it was no big deal, told Victoria that Samantha was just a friend who crashed at his place sometimes. But Samantha had receipts. Literally. She showed Victoria credit card statements where Marcus had been paying for dinners, trips, gifts, the whole relationship experience. I closed my eyes, trying to process everything. Marcus hadn't just betrayed me with Victoria. He'd been running multiple relationships simultaneously, lying to all of us, with apparently no conscience whatsoever. Is the wedding still happening? As of this morning, Victoria was insisting it was still on. But Elena, there's something else. Something bigger. I'm not sure I can handle anything bigger. Remember how you said Victoria had been asking a lot of questions about your job lately? About the community center project? I did remember. Over the past few months, Victoria had shown unusual interest in my work. She'd asked about timelines, budgets, who the key stakeholders were. I'd been flattered by her sudden attention to my career, thinking she was finally taking me seriously as a professional. What about it? I did some digging after everything came out. Elena, your sister has been dating Marcus for 6 months, but she's also been in contact with Richard Blackstone. Richard Blackstone was a developer in Portland, known for buying up properties in gentrifying neighborhoods and turning them into luxury condos. He was also someone I'd clashed with professionally, since his projects often displaced the exact communities I was trying to serve. Why would Victoria be talking to Blackstone? Because the lot next to your community center just went up for sale, and according to the real estate listings, Blackstone Development has made an offer. My blood ran cold. The community center sat on a corner lot in a neighborhood that was rapidly changing. When we designed the building, we'd specifically chosen that location because the adjacent lot was owned by the city and zoned for public use. It was supposed to remain green space, a small park where families could gather. The city wouldn't sell that lot to a developer. They would if someone convinced them the community center was financially unstable and likely to fail, if they believed the neighborhood didn't actually want or need the facility. That's ridiculous. The center's been operating successfully for 8 months. I know that, and you know that. But if someone were feeding false information to the right people, claiming there were problems with the design, issues with the contractor, community complaints, the pieces started clicking together in my mind. Victoria's questions about my work, her sudden interest in Marcus right around the time the community center opened. Her casual remarks about how much money developers were making in Portland, how smart people were getting rich by buying and selling real estate. You think Victoria and Marcus were working with Blackstone? I think Victoria saw an opportunity and took it. She knew you were emotionally invested in that project, knew you'd shared details about its vulnerabilities. And I think she figured out how to monetize that information. I felt sick. The betrayal of my relationship had been devastating, but this was something else entirely. This was an attack on my professional life, on a project that served vulnerable families, on everything I'd worked to build. But why steal Marcus? If she was just after information about the community center, she didn't need to destroy my personal life too. Maybe that was just a bonus. Or maybe she needed him distracted and compliant. Think about it, Elena. Marcus is a photographer. He has access to buildings, events, people. He could document problems that don't exist, create a narrative about community opposition or structural issues. The more I thought about it, the more sense it made. Marcus had visited the community center several times over the past few months, claiming he wanted to do a photo series about urban development. I'd given him full access, proud to show off the project. He could have photographed anything, documented any small issue, and blown it out of proportion. Do you have proof of any of this? Not yet. But Elena, I think we need to find out what Victoria really knows. And what she's been telling Blackstone. I was quiet for a long moment, watching traffic move through downtown Portland, thinking about everything that had happened over the past 2 weeks. I'd been so focused on the personal betrayal that I hadn't considered the possibility of something more calculated, more sinister. The wedding is in 5 days, I said finally. Yeah, and? And Victoria's world just fell apart. Her perfect romantic narrative is crumbling. She's been exposed as just another one of Marcus's victims, and if what you're suggesting is true, her business arrangement with Blackstone might be falling apart too. So people make mistakes when they're desperate. They say things they shouldn't say, do things they shouldn't do. Elena, what are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time to attend my former wedding. The idea crystallized as I said it. For 2 weeks I'd been hiding, licking my wounds, trying to process the betrayal and move forward. But if Victoria and Marcus had been plotting against my professional life as well as destroying my personal one, then this wasn't just about a stolen fiancé anymore. This was about protecting something much more important than my feelings. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Victoria wanted my wedding. She can have it. But she's gonna get more than she bargained for. That evening, I called my parents in Phoenix and explained everything Chloe had discovered. My father, Roberto, had been unusually quiet during my original phone call about the breakup. He'd expressed anger and disappointment, but something in his tone had suggested he wasn't entirely surprised. Now I understood why. Maya, he said carefully, there are some things your mother and I didn't tell you when this first happened. What things? Victoria called us 3 months ago. She said she was worried about you, that you were working too hard, that Marcus was concerned about your mental health. My mother took over the phone. She said you'd been acting erratically, making poor decisions at work, alienating people. She asked if we thought you might need professional help. The manipulation was breathtaking. Victoria had been laying groundwork for months, creating a narrative that I was unstable, unreliable, possibly having some kind of breakdown. If questions were raised about the community center project, if problems appeared that didn't make sense, people would assume they were the result of my poor judgment or mental state. Did you believe her? We were concerned, my father admitted. You had been working very long hours, and you seemed stressed whenever we talked. But we thought it was just the pressure of the wedding and the new job. Victoria also asked a lot of questions about your work, my mother added. She wanted to know about your boss, your clients, whether you were happy with how the community center was being received. They'd been playing a long game, I realized. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment betrayal. This was a calculated campaign to undermine both my personal and professional life, with my sister at the center of it all. There's something else, my father said. Victoria asked us not to come to Portland for the wedding. What? She called last week, after the engagement was announced. She said it would be too awkward with you living in the same city, that maybe it would be better if we stayed home to avoid family drama. Victoria wanted my wedding, but she didn't want my family there to witness it. She wanted to erase me completely, to step into my life without any reminders of who it had originally belonged to. But we're coming anyway, my mother said firmly. Your father already booked the flights. If our youngest daughter thinks she can steal from our oldest and keep us away, she's about to learn otherwise. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation that felt surreal given the circumstances. I was getting ready to attend my own stolen wedding, not as the bride, but as something else entirely. I wasn't sure what yet, but I knew it wouldn't be, as the heartbroken victim Victoria expected me to be. Chloe helped me choose an outfit that would make a statement without being obvious about it. We settled on a midnight blue dress that was elegant enough for a formal wedding but distinctive enough that everyone would remember seeing me there. The color was symbolic too, dark as the secrets that were about to be exposed. I also did something I'd never done before in my life. I hired a private investigator. James Chen, recommended by a lawyer friend of Chloe's, specialized in corporate espionage and fraud cases. When I explained the situation, he didn't seem surprised by the complexity of it. Family-based fraud is more common than people think, he said during our consultation. Often the perpetrators assume their victims won't fight back because of emotional ties. They count on shame and family loyalty to keep their crimes hidden. Can you find out if Victoria has been working with Blackstone? I can find out what communications exist between them, what financial transactions might have occurred, and whether any official complaints or reports have been filed about your community center project. How long will that take? For basic information, 3 days. For detailed evidence that would hold up in court, a week or 2. I paid his retainer fee and asked him to expedite everything he could. If Victoria and Marcus were planning to use the wedding as some kind of celebration of their successful scheme, I wanted to be ready with facts, not just suspicions. The night before the wedding, I got an unexpected phone call from Patricia, the events coordinator at the Whitmore Mansion. Elena, I hope you don't mind me calling. I know tomorrow is difficult for you, and I wanted you to know that all of us here are thinking of you. Thank you, Patricia, that's very kind. There's something else. Something I probably shouldn't tell you, but I feel like you should know. I sat up straighter. What is it? Your sister came in today for a final walkthrough. She brought a man with her, but it wasn't Marcus. Who was it? An older gentleman, very well dressed, clearly expensive taste. They spent a long time discussing the photography arrangements, which seemed odd since you'd already finalized those plans with Marcus months ago. Did you get his name? I didn't ask directly, but I heard your sister call him Richard. Richard Blackstone. At my wedding venue the day before the ceremony, discussing photography with Victoria. The implications made my head spin. Elena, there's something else. This man, Richard, he asked very specific questions about the guest list, about who would be attending, what their professions were. It felt more like reconnaissance than wedding planning. What did you tell him? Nothing, of course. Guest information is confidential. But it made me uncomfortable, combined with some of the other changes your sister has made. What changes? She's added several last-minute guests, people who weren't on your original list. She said they were business associates of Marcus's, but when I called Marcus to confirm the catering count, he seemed surprised by the names. Victoria was turning my wedding into some kind of networking event for Blackstone. Using the guest list I'd carefully crafted, the venue I'd chosen, the celebration I'd planned, as an opportunity to advance whatever scheme they were running. Patricia, I need to ask you a favor. Of course. I'm planning to attend the wedding tomorrow. There was a long pause. Are you sure that's a good idea? Probably not. But I need to be there, and I need you to not interfere when I am. Elena, I can't let you disrupt the event. We have a reputation to maintain. I'm not planning to disrupt anything. I just need to observe, to see who's there and what's really happening. You have my word that I won't cause a scene or interfere with the ceremony. Another pause. Will you be coming alone? My parents will be with me, and probably my friend Chloe. Your parents are coming? But your sister said... My sister said a lot of things that weren't true. My parents have every right to attend their daughter's wedding, even if it's not the daughter they originally thought they'd be celebrating. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Table 12, she said finally. I'll have a table set up in the back corner, where you'll have a clear view but won't be immediately visible to the main wedding party. I'll tell the staff your family friends who were added at the last minute. Thank you. Elena, I hope you know what you're doing. So do I. The morning of October 15th dawned crisp and clear, exactly the kind of perfect fall day I'd dreamed of for my wedding. I woke up in Chloe's apartment, put on the midnight blue dress, and tried to prepare myself mentally for what was about to happen. My parents had arrived the night before, and seeing them had been both comforting and heartbreaking. They looked older than when I'd seen them last, worn down by the stress of their daughters' conflict. But they also looked determined, ready to support me in whatever came next. Are you sure about this, Mija? My mother asked as we drove toward the venue. No, I admitted, but I'm sure I need to be there. The Whitmore mansion looked exactly as I'd imagined it would on my wedding day. Fall flowers cascaded from every surface, the trees were dressed in autumn colors, and the late afternoon light cast everything in a golden glow. It was perfect, and it should have been mine. We arrived during the cocktail hour when guests were mingling on the terrace and in the garden. Patricia met us at a side entrance and escorted us to table 12, positioned exactly as she'd promised, where we could see everything but remain relatively inconspicuous. The guest list was mostly familiar, people from Marcus's photography business and Victoria's social circle, mixed with family members I'd expected to celebrate with under very different circumstances. But there were also faces I didn't recognize, older men in expensive suits who looked more like business associates than wedding guests. And there, holding court near the bar, was Richard Blackstone himself. Tall, silver-haired, radiating the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. He was deep in conversation with several people I recognized as city council members and local business leaders. Elena, Chloe whispered, look at the photographer. I followed her gaze to where Marcus should have been capturing candid moments of the pre-ceremony mingling. Instead, there was a woman I didn't recognize, someone who was definitely not the photographer I'd hired months ago. Where's Marcus? I asked. Good question. As if summoned by our conversation, Marcus appeared from inside the mansion, but he looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his suit wrinkled, and there was something wild around his eyes. He was scanning the crowd frantically, like he was looking for someone or something. Victoria emerged a moment later, and the contrast was stark. She looked stunning in a dress that was similar to mine but more elaborate, more expensive. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, her smile radiant. But when she looked at Marcus, I caught a flash of something cold and calculating that I'd never seen before. They were both performing, I realized, playing the role of happy couple while something else entirely was happening beneath the surface. The ceremony was about to begin, and guests started moving toward the garden, where chairs were arranged in perfect rows, facing an altar decorated with white roses and greenery. My white roses and greenery, arranged exactly as I'd specified months ago. As we took our seats, I noticed James Chen, the private investigator, discreetly positioned near the back with a telephoto lens camera. He'd promised to document everything he could, focusing especially on interactions between Victoria, Blackstone, and any city officials who might be present. The music started, the same processional I'd chosen, played by the same string quartet I'd hired. Marcus took his position at the altar, still looking nervous and distracted. The wedding party began their walk down the aisle, bridesmaids in lavender dresses carrying bouquets of white peonies. And then the music swelled for the bridal march, and Victoria appeared at the back of the garden, radiant and triumphant, wearing my grandmother's ring and carrying my grandmother's bouquet, about to marry my fiancé in the wedding I'd planned. For a moment, the pain was so sharp I could barely breathe. This should have been my moment, my walk down this aisle, my happy ending. Instead, I was watching someone else live my dream, while I sat in the shadows like a ghost at my own funeral. But then I looked more closely at Victoria's face as she walked toward Marcus, and I saw something that made me sit up straighter. She wasn't looking at him with love or joy or even satisfaction. She was looking at him like he was a problem she needed to solve, like he was a tool that was no longer working properly. And Marcus, watching her approach, looked less like a man about to marry the love of his life, and more like someone walking toward his own execution. Something was wrong with their perfect stolen romance, something beyond the Samantha revelation from earlier in the week. As Victoria reached the altar and took Marcus's hands, I could see tension in both their faces that had nothing to do with normal wedding nerves. The officiant began the ceremony, speaking about love and commitment and choosing each other every day. The words felt like mockery, given what I knew about how this union had actually come to be. But as the ceremony progressed, I found myself watching the audience as much as the bride and groom. Richard Blackstone was taking notes, actual notes, in a small leather notebook, while occasionally pointing out specific guests to a younger man beside him. This wasn't a businessman attending a social event. This was someone conducting business under the cover of a wedding celebration. And then, just as the officiant asked if anyone had any reason why these two should not be wed, my phone buzzed with a text from James Chen. "Check your email. Now." I discreetly opened my email to find a message with several attachments. Bank records showing payments from Blackstone Development to an account belonging to Victoria Rodriguez. City planning documents with complaints about the community center, all filed by concerned citizens whose addresses traced back to shell companies owned by Blackstone. And most damning of all, a recorded phone conversation between Victoria and someone at the city planning office, discussing how to expedite the sale of the lot next to my community center. I had the proof I needed. Victoria hadn't just stolen my fiancé and the wedding. She'd been systematically working to destroy my career and the community project I'd poured my heart into. The officiant was asking for rings now, and Victoria and Marcus were exchanging vows they'd stolen from other couples, making promises that were built on lies from the very beginning. The whole scene was so absurd, so grotesquely inappropriate, that I almost started laughing. But then Victoria's voice rang out clear and confident, as she promised to love Marcus forever, and I felt something shift inside me. The pain and heartbreak that had been consuming me for 2 weeks crystallized into something much more useful: righteous anger. As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, as Marcus kissed Victoria with what looked more like relief than passion, as the crowd erupted in applause for the happy couple, I was already planning my next move. Victoria thought she'd won. She thought she'd successfully stolen my life and gotten away with it. She had no idea that her perfect stolen wedding was about to become the scene of her complete downfall. The reception was about to begin, and I had evidence to share. The reception began with Victoria and Marcus making their grand entrance as husband and wife, their faces glowing with what the photographer captured as pure joy. But what I could now see was barely concealed tension. They moved through their first dance to the song I'd chosen months ago, surrounded by flowers I'd selected, in the venue I'd fallen in love with. Everything was exactly as I'd planned it, except for the two people at the center of it all. I watched from table 12 as guests congratulated the happy couple, as champagne flowed and conversation buzzed with the energy that good weddings generate. My parents sat beside me in stunned silence, still processing the revelation that their youngest daughter had orchestrated something so elaborate and cruel. Chloe kept checking her phone, coordinating with James Chen, who was positioned strategically around the reception space, documenting everything. The evidence in my email felt like a loaded weapon: bank records, city documents, recorded conversations, all proving that Victoria's betrayal went far beyond stealing my fiancé. She'd been systematically destroying my professional reputation while pretending to plan her romantic coup. The question now was how to use what I knew, and when. Richard Blackstone had positioned himself at a prominent table near the front, surrounded by city council members and local business leaders. I watched him work the room with practiced ease, shaking hands, sharing business cards, treating my stolen wedding reception like his personal networking event. Every few minutes he'd catch Victoria's eye across the room, and she'd nod slightly, like an actress receiving direction from her director. The first course was being served when Marcus disappeared again. I'd been watching him throughout the cocktail hour, noting how he kept checking his phone, how his smile seemed forced, how he kept scanning the crowd as if expecting trouble. Now his chair sat empty beside Victoria, who was carrying on animated conversations with guests as if nothing was wrong. "Where did he go?" Chloe whispered. Before I could answer, I saw him through the windows, pacing on the mansion's side terrace with his phone pressed to his ear. Even from a distance, his body language screamed distress. He was gesticulating wildly, running his hands through his hair, looking every direction except toward the reception where his new wife was holding court. "Something's happening," I murmured to my parents. My father followed my gaze to Marcus on the terrace. "He looks like a man who's realized he's made a terrible mistake." 20 minutes later, Marcus returned to the reception, but he looked even worse than when he'd left. His face was pale, his hands were shaking slightly, and when Victoria tried to take his arm for photos, he pulled away with barely concealed irritation. I was so focused on watching their interaction that I almost missed the arrival of an unexpected guest. Samantha, the woman who'd exposed Marcus's other relationship, walked into the reception wearing a black cocktail dress and an expression of grim determination. She moved through the crowd with purpose, and several guests turned to watch her with confused recognition. She went straight to Victoria. "Excuse me," Samantha said, her voice carrying across the immediate area. "I think we need to finish our conversation from the other day." Victoria's face went through a rapid series of expressions. Confusion, recognition, horror, and finally a desperate attempt at composure. "I'm sorry, but this is a private event. I think you should leave. I think your new husband's other wife might disagree with that." The words hit the nearby guests like a physical blow. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, champagne glasses paused halfway to lips, and suddenly a circle of silence expanded around Victoria and Samantha like ripples in a pond. "Other wife?" someone whispered. Marcus appeared at Victoria's side, his face now completely drained of color. "Samantha, what are you doing here?" "What I should have done months ago," she replied, pulling a folder from her purse. "Telling the truth about who you really are." She opened the folder and began distributing photographs to the stunned guests nearby. Pictures of her and Marcus together, clearly in romantic situations, dated over the past several months. Wedding photos from a small ceremony in Las Vegas, dated 3 months ago, showing Marcus in a tuxedo placing a ring on Samantha's finger. "Marcus and I were married in April," Samantha announced, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "While he was engaged to Elena, while he was planning this wedding with Victoria. He's been lying to all of you." The reception erupted in chaos. Guests began talking all at once, some demanding explanations, others pulling out their phones to document the drama. Victoria stood frozen in the center of it all, her perfect wedding collapsing around her in real time. "That's impossible," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Marcus, tell them she's lying." Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked around the circle of faces watching him, all waiting for an explanation that would make sense of the nonsensical, and seemed to realize that his carefully constructed house of lies was finally falling down. "I can explain," he said weakly. "Can you?" Victoria's voice was rising now, the composure she'd maintained all day finally cracking. "Can you explain why you married someone else while we were planning our wedding?" "It wasn't supposed to matter," Marcus said, the words tumbling out desperately. "The Las Vegas thing was just for immigration purposes. Samantha needed a green card, and I needed the money. It was supposed to be temporary, just paperwork." "You married someone else for money?" Victoria's voice reached a pitch that could shatter crystal. "While you were engaged to Elena? While you were sleeping with me?" The ugly truth was spilling out in front of 150 wedding guests, in front of Richard Blackstone and his business associates, in front of city officials and family members and photographers, who were capturing every mortifying moment. But I realized this was my moment. While Victoria was dealing with the revelation that her romantic conquest was actually a fraud, while Marcus was too panicked to think clearly, while all eyes were focused on the drama unfolding at the center of the reception, I could move without being noticed. I stood up from table 12 and walked toward Richard Blackstone's table. He was leaning back in his chair, watching the chaos with obvious amusement, probably calculating how this scandal might affect his business arrangements with Victoria. "Mr. Blackstone," I said, stopping beside his chair. He looked up with mild interest, not recognizing me immediately. "Yes? I'm Elena Rodriguez. I believe you've been doing business with my sister." His expression shifted to something more guarded. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." I pulled out my phone and opened the email from James Chen. "You've been paying Victoria to provide inside information about my community center project. You've been filing false complaints with the city planning office to create problems that don't exist. You've been using my sister to sabotage my work so you can buy the adjacent lot and build luxury condos." The conversation at his table had stopped completely. The city council members and business leaders who'd been laughing and networking moments before were now staring at Blackstone with dawning comprehension. "That's a very serious accusation," one of the council members said slowly. "It's a very serious crime," I replied, forwarding the email attachments to everyone at the table whose phone numbers I could find through the venue's guest contact system. Bank records showing payments from Blackstone Development to Victoria Rodriguez. City planning documents with fraudulent complaints. Recorded phone conversations discussing how to expedite the sale of public land to private developers. Blackstone's face had gone from amused to furious. "You have no proof of anything." "Actually, I have extensive proof. Would you like me to share it with everyone here? Or would you prefer to discuss this privately with the authorities?" Before he could answer, Victoria's voice cut through the reception noise like a siren. "Where is Elena?" I turned to see her scanning the crowd, her face flushed with rage and desperation. She'd apparently realized that the chaos with Marcus and Samantha, while devastating, was only part of her problem. She was looking for me, probably because she'd figured out that I wasn't going to remain a silent victim forever. "Elena," she called out when she spotted me near Blackstone's table. "What are you doing here?" The entire reception turned to watch as she stalked across the dance floor toward me, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a war banner. Marcus followed weakly in her wake, still trying to explain something to anyone who would listen. "I'm attending your wedding," I said calmly. "Congratulations, by the way. Though I have to say, it's not quite the celebration you planned, is it?" "You did this," Victoria hissed, gesturing towards Samantha, who was still showing photographs to fascinated guests. "You brought her here to ruin my wedding. Actually, I had nothing to do with Samantha. That particular revelation was Marcus's gift to you all by himself." Victoria's eyes darted to Blackstone, who was looking increasingly uncomfortable as the city officials at his table examined the evidence on their phones with growing alarm. "But you did bring other gifts," I continued. "Like the truth about your business arrangement with Mr. Blackstone. The truth about how you've been systematically trying to destroy my career while pretending to steal my fiancé out of love." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do. You've been feeding information to Blackstone for months, helping him file false complaints about my community center, creating a narrative that the project was failing so the city would be willing to sell the adjacent land. You thought if you could destroy my professional reputation and my personal life simultaneously, you'd clear the field for whatever scheme you were running." Victoria glanced around the reception, suddenly aware that every conversation had stopped, that every guest was listening to our confrontation with rapt attention. The photographer, the one who'd replaced Marcus, was capturing everything. "You're delusional," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Am I? Then you won't mind if I share these bank records showing payments from Blackstone Development to your personal account, or these recorded phone calls where you discuss strategies for undermining the community center project." I held up my phone, finger hovering over the send button that would distribute all of James Chen's evidence to every guest at the reception. Victoria's face went completely white. "Elena, please," she said, her voice suddenly small and desperate. "Can we discuss this privately? Like you discussed stealing my fiancé privately? Like you discussed destroying my career privately?" "No, Victoria. You wanted my wedding, my life, my spotlight. Now you have it. All of it." I pressed send. Within moments, phones throughout the reception were buzzing with notifications. Guests began opening attachments, scanning bank records, listening to audio files. The evidence was overwhelming and damning, painting a clear picture of conspiracy, fraud, and systematic betrayal. Richard Blackstone stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I should go." "Actually," said one of the city council members, also standing, "I think you should stay. We're going to have some very serious questions for you about these allegations." Another council member was already on her phone, presumably calling the authorities. The business leaders at Blackstone's table were distancing themselves physically, their chairs scraping away from him like he'd become radioactive. Meanwhile, Marcus had cornered Samantha near the bar, apparently trying to convince her to leave quietly. But she was having none of it. "You don't get to ask me for favors anymore," she was saying, loud enough for half the reception to hear. "You used me for a green card scam, you cheated on Elena with Victoria, you cheated on Victoria with me, and God knows who else you've been lying to." "It's not like that," Marcus protested. "It's exactly like that. You're a con artist, Marcus, and you're about to face consequences for the first time in your pathetic life." She pulled out her phone and began dialing. "I'm calling immigration services. They're going to be very interested in your fraudulent marriage." Marcus's face went ashen. If immigration discovered that his marriage to Samantha was a sham, he'd face serious federal charges. If they investigated further and found his pattern of deception, his entire life would unravel. Victoria, watching her new husband's complete breakdown, seemed to realize that everything she'd worked for was disappearing. The romantic conquest that was supposed to prove her superiority over me had turned out to be a criminal who'd made her an unwitting accomplice in multiple frauds. The business arrangement that was supposed to make her wealthy had just been exposed to the exact people who could prosecute her for it. "This is all your fault," she said, turning on me with sudden venom. "You couldn't just accept that Marcus chose me. You had to destroy everything." "I didn't destroy anything, Victoria. I just refused to let you destroy me. He never loved you anyway. Everything he told you was a lie from the beginning." "You're right," I said, and for the first time since this conversation started, I smiled. "He never loved me. Just like he never loved you. Just like he's incapable of loving anyone except himself." The truth of it hit Victoria visibly. She looked across the reception at Marcus, who was still arguing with Samantha while federal crimes were being reported, who'd put her in legal jeopardy for the sake of a green card scam, who'd used her just as thoroughly as he'd used me. "Oh God," she whispered, "what have I done?" "You've shown everyone who you really are," I said, "just like Marcus has. Just like Mr. Blackstone has." Police sirens were audible in the distance now, growing closer. Someone had called the authorities about the fraud allegations, and Portland's finest were apparently taking the matter seriously. My parents appeared at my side, having made their way through the chaos. My mother put her arm around me while my father stared at Victoria with profound disappointment. "Victoria," he said, his voice heavy with sadness, "how could you do this to your sister?" "I thought I was winning," Victoria said, tears finally starting to flow. "I thought I was getting everything I wanted." "What did you want?" I asked. She looked around the reception, at the chaos she'd created, at the life she'd stolen and destroyed in the same moment. "I wanted to matter. I wanted to be the successful one, the important one, the one everyone paid attention to." "You always mattered, Victoria. You were already important. But it wasn't enough for you to build your own life. You had to destroy mine." The police arrived as the reception was disintegrating around us. Guests were leaving in confused clusters, unsure whether they'd just witnessed a wedding or a crime scene. Richard Blackstone was in heated discussion with city officials and what appeared to be federal agents. Marcus was being questioned about immigration fraud while Samantha provided evidence of their fake marriage. And Victoria stood in the center of it all, still wearing her wedding dress, still wearing my grandmother's ring, watching her perfect plan collapse into consequences she'd never imagined. "Elena?" she said as the police approached her with questions about the bank records and city planning fraud. "I'm sorry." "No, you're not," I replied. "You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference." The officer asking questions was polite but thorough. The evidence James Chen had gathered was being taken seriously, and it was clear that multiple agencies would be investigating the fraud allegations. Victoria's wedding day was ending with potential federal charges. As chaos swirled around us, Chloe appeared at my elbow. "How do you feel?" she asked. I considered the question. 3 weeks ago, I'd thought I was going to marry Marcus and live happily ever after. Instead, I'd discovered that the people closest to me were capable of elaborate betrayal, that my professional work was under attack, that my entire life had been built on lies. But I'd also discovered that I was stronger than I'd known, that I could fight back when cornered, that I wouldn't accept being a victim forever. "I feel free," I said. Marcus was being led away in handcuffs, charged with immigration fraud and conspiracy. Victoria was facing questioning about her role in the city planning scheme, with potential charges ranging from fraud to conspiracy to corruption. Richard Blackstone was already on the phone with his lawyers, but the evidence against him was substantial and public. The wedding I'd planned, the life I'd thought I wanted, was ending in spectacular destruction. But none of it felt like loss anymore. It felt like revelation, like the truth finally coming to light after months of deception. My phone buzzed with a text from James Chen. "Federal authorities want to interview you about the evidence. This is going to be a big case." The community center project, the work I'd poured my heart into, was safe. The false complaints would be withdrawn, the fraudulent concerns would be exposed, and the adjacent lot would remain public space as originally planned. My career, far from being destroyed, would probably benefit from the publicity surrounding the case. 6 months later, I stood in my new office in downtown Portland, looking out at the city I'd chosen to make my home. The Architectural Digest feature had led to 3 major project offers, including one to design affordable housing that would serve the same community as the center that had started this whole mess. Victoria had pleaded guilty to fraud charges and received 2 years, probation plus community service. She was required to make full restitution to the city and to me, though the money mattered less than the acknowledgement that what she'd done was criminal, not just cruel. Marcus had been deported after serving 6 months for immigration fraud. Samantha had received immunity in exchange for her testimony and was apparently doing well, having started her own business with the settlement money she'd received. Richard Blackstone's development company was under federal investigation, his city contracts were under review, and his reputation in Portland was effectively destroyed. The lot next to the community center had been permanently designated as public green space, exactly as it should have been from the beginning. I hadn't spoken to Victoria since the trial, though my mother occasionally shared updates about her life in Phoenix, where she'd moved to start over. She was working as a receptionist at a small company, living in a studio apartment, apparently trying to rebuild her life on a foundation of truth instead of manipulation. The wedding dress I'd never worn still hung in my closet, but I was thinking of donating it. Someone else could have their perfect day in it. Someone whose marriage would be built on love instead of lies. My grandmother's ring had been returned to me as part of the restitution, but I'd had it reset into a necklace. Some things were too beautiful to discard, but too complicated to wear in their original form. Chloe knocked on my office door, carrying coffee and a newspaper. "You made the front page again," she said, spreading the Portland Tribune on my desk. The headline read, "Community Architect Wins National Award for Urban Development Project." Below it was a photo of me standing in front of the community center, surrounded by children from the neighborhood programs. "Not bad for someone whose career was supposed to be destroyed," Chloe observed. "Funny how that worked out." I agreed. My phone rang and the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Elena Rodriguez?" "Yes? This is Diana Chen from the MacArthur Foundation. We'd like to discuss a fellowship opportunity with you." The MacArthur Fellowship. The so-called Genius Grant. I sat down hard in my chair, suddenly dizzy. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" As Diana Chen explained the nomination process and what the fellowship would mean for my work, I found myself thinking about that terrible morning when I'd walked into my apartment to find my life in ruins. How devastated I'd been, how completely lost I'd felt. I'd thought Victoria had stolen my future when she stole my fiancé and my wedding. Instead, she'd accidentally given me something much more valuable: the knowledge that I was strong enough to fight for myself, smart enough to uncover the truth, and valuable enough to deserve better than the scraps of affection and respect I'd been accepting. The woman who'd planned that wedding, who'd been content with Marcus's mediocre love and Victoria's conditional sisterhood, who'd been willing to accept second best because it felt safe, was gone. In her place was someone who knew her worth, who wouldn't settle for less than she deserved, who understood that sometimes the best thing that can happen is losing everything you thought you wanted. Victoria had tried to steal my life, but she'd ended up giving me a better one. Marcus had broken my heart, but he'd also freed me to find someone who would love me the way I deserved to be loved. The wedding I'd planned had been perfect in every detail except the most important one. It had been built on lies. The life I was building now was messier, more uncertain, but completely authentic. As I accepted the MacArthur Foundation's invitation to continue the conversation, I realized that Victoria had been right about one thing. Marcus had never really loved me. But she'd been wrong about why that mattered. It didn't make me less worthy of love, it made him unworthy of mine. And that, I thought, as I looked out at the city where I'd found my true calling, made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.